In a world where power silences truth, and wealth shields cruelty, one boy's desperate cry would uncover a secret that could destroy everything. The streets of Ravenwood thrummed with relentless energy, horns blaring, heels clicking, voices colliding in a chaotic symphony of indifference. Yet amidst this frenzy stood Caleb, a young black boy with dirt-streaked cheeks and eyes far too old for his years. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. Clutching his tattered cardboard bed, he stretched out a trembling hand. "Please, anything helps," he whispered, his voice raw and fragile against the city's roar. But the people swept past him, their gazes sliding over him as if he were nothing more than a crack in the pavement. Each rejection chipped away at his hope, though he stood firm, refusing to let the cold or the hunger claim his spirit. Then his eyes landed on her. Veronica. Draped in a shimmering coat and dripping with jewels, she radiated a confidence born from privilege. Caleb hesitated, but hunger overpowered doubt. He stepped forward, his words faltering. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you spare anything? I haven't eaten in days." Veronica turned, her gaze icy and piercing. "Don't touch me," she spat, her voice sharp enough to wound. "Do you know how much this coat costs? You couldn't afford it in 100 lifetimes." Her disdain hung heavy in the air, but Caleb tried again. "Please, I can work. Clean your car, carry your bags, anything." Her laugh cut through him, cold and cruel. "Work? You? Filthy and useless. People like you just want to beg and steal." Caleb's face flushed, but he held her gaze, his voice trembling yet steady. "You don't know me." But even as he spoke, the weight of her words bore down on him, a reminder of how invisible he had always been. The air hung heavy with tension as Caleb's quiet defiance lingered in the space between him and Veronica. Her sharp words seemed to echo, drawing the attention of passers-by. Whispers rippled through the crowd, phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. A young black boy being berated by a wealthy woman. Just as Veronica opened her mouth to deliver another cutting remark, a steady voice broke through the noise. "That's enough." The words were firm, commanding, and silenced the hum of the crowd. Caleb turned to see a tall man stepping forward. His tailored suit and polished demeanor made it clear he belonged to the same world as Veronica, but there was a warmth in his eyes that Caleb hadn't seen in anyone all day. "Adrian," Veronica said, startled, her confident facade wavering. "I was just teaching this boy a lesson about his place." Adrian's gaze shifted from Veronica to Caleb, his expression softening as he took in the boy's thin frame and trembling hands. "Is that so?" he replied, his voice calm but laced with an edge. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp bill, folding it into Caleb's hand. "Here. This isn't charity. It's acknowledgement. You deserve better than this." Caleb stared at the money, his throat tightening. It was more than he'd ever held at once. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible, his voice cracking under the weight of the gesture. Adrian turned to Veronica, his eyes sharp now. "And you," he said, his tone cutting through the air like steel, "have shown everyone here exactly who you are." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Veronica's face flushed red, her indignation melting into flustered anger. "Adrian, you don't understand." But Adrian raised a hand, silencing her. "No. I've seen enough." With that, he turned back to Caleb, offering a gentle smile. "Take care of yourself, kid. Don't let anyone tell you you're less than what you are." As Adrian walked away, the crowd began to disperse, their attention drawn back to their own lives. But Caleb remained frozen, clutching the bill tightly in his hand. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt seen. It wasn't just the money, it was the way Adrian had looked at him, spoken to him, as if he were worth something. That night, as Caleb sat under the dim light of a street lamp, the weight of the day settled on him. Yet, amidst the exhaustion and hunger, a flicker of hope burned quietly within. The next morning, Caleb stood outside a bakery in Ravenwood, the tantalizing aroma of fresh bread and pastries wafting through the air. The crisp bill Adrian had given him felt heavy in his pocket, a ticket to relief, but also a source of anxiety. He glanced nervously through the bakery's glass window, watching well-dressed customers place their orders with ease. Summoning courage, Caleb opened the door, only to feel a firm tug on his arm. "Don't even think about it," a sharp voice hissed. Startled, he turned to see a girl his age, her tangled hair peeking out from under a torn beanie. Her wary eyes scanned the street as she pulled him back. "You walk in there, they'll call the cops before you can say croissant." Caleb frowned. "But I just want to buy something to eat." The girl scoffed, crossing her arms. "Yeah, and they just want us out of sight. Look at you, look at me. We don't belong in places like that." Her voice was laced with bitterness, each word cutting deeper than the last. "My name's Lila," she added, softening slightly as Caleb's confusion lingered. "You must be new to this, huh?" Caleb hesitated before nodding. "I've been on the streets for a while, if that's what you mean." "Not long enough," Lila said, motioning for him to follow. "Come on. There's a food cart a few blocks away where they don't care what you look like." The two wove through Ravenwood's narrow alleys, avoiding the gaze of the early risers and uniformed officers patrolling the streets. Lila moved like she had memorized every inch of the city's back roads, her steps quick and deliberate. Caleb, clutching his money tightly, trailed behind. When they reached the food cart, Lila handed the vendor a few coins she had scavenged. "2 sandwiches," she said briskly, then turned to Caleb. "Your treat next time." They sat by a graffiti-streaked wall, the silence between them broken only by the distant hum of the city. Between bites, Caleb glanced at Lila, his curiosity breaking through his hunger. "Why did you help me?" Lila shrugged, chewing thoughtfully. "Someone helped me once. I guess I figured I'd pass it on. Don't get used to it, though. Out here, people smile at you one minute and take everything you've got the next." Her words hung heavy in the air, a sobering reminder of the world Caleb now inhabited. "So what do I do?" he asked, his voice low. "You get smart," Lila said, her tone firm. "Lay low. Trust no one. And whatever you do, don't let anyone see what you've got." Caleb nodded slowly, absorbing her words. As the morning wore on, Lila led him to quieter parts of the city, teaching him which shops wouldn't chase him away, where to find shelter, and how to avoid trouble. Her streetwise knowledge was a lifeline, pulling him out of the uncertainty that had shadowed his every step. For the first time since Adrian's kindness, Caleb felt the stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: cautious hope. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ravenwood Central Park, where Caleb sat quietly on a bench, his mind replaying Lila's advice. His fingers idly toyed with the edges of Adrian's bill, now tucked safely in his pocket. Despite Lila's warnings, Caleb couldn't shake the sense that Adrian's kindness meant something more, a rare spark in the darkness of his world. "Hey, Caleb!" Lila's sharp whisper jolted him back. She appeared beside him, her gaze fixed on a figure strolling through the park. Caleb followed her line of sight and froze. "Adrian." The man moved with quiet confidence, his tailored suit pristine even in the casual setting. Before Caleb could react, Lila muttered, "Jackpot," and slipped into the crowd, her movements stealthy and precise. Caleb's stomach dropped as he noticed the glint of a blade in her hand. "No," he breathed, springing to his feet. He caught up to her just as she drew closer to Adrian, her intent clear. "Lila, stop!" he hissed, grabbing her arm. She spun around, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing? We could live off what he's got for weeks." Caleb shook his head firmly. "He's not like the others. He helped me. He's good." For a moment, Lila's face hardened with disbelief, but something in Caleb's voice made her pause. With a frustrated sigh, she slipped the blade back into her pocket. "Fine. But don't expect him to save you again," she muttered, retreating into the shadows. Caleb turned back to find Adrian watching him, his expression curious but calm. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked, stepping closer. "Yes, sir," Caleb stammered, his voice shaky. I just wanted to thank you again. For what you did. Adrian nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It's good to see you're doing okay. Before Caleb could respond, a sleek black car pulled up nearby, and a woman emerged. Her piercing gaze swept over Caleb before landing on Adrian. There you are, she said sharply. Veronica, Adrian replied, his tone suddenly distant. Her eyes lingered on Caleb with thinly veiled disdain. You waste too much time on people like him, she snapped, the venom in her voice unmistakable. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone steady. That's enough, Veronica. Caleb stepped back, the weight of her words pressing on him like a familiar burden. But this time, something in Adrian's firm response sparked a quiet resolve within him. That evening, Caleb sat on a cold stone step outside a boarded-up storefront, replaying the day's events in his mind. Lila's parting words echoed in his ears. Don't expect him to save you again. She wasn't entirely wrong. The world had taught Caleb to expect the worst from people, and yet Adrian's kindness remained an anomaly he couldn't ignore. As he wrestled with his thoughts, a black car pulled to a stop across the street. Caleb stiffened as he recognized Veronica stepping out, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement. She entered a small, dimly lit cafe, her movements precise, calculated. Curiosity prickled at Caleb's senses. He glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, and crossed the street, crouching near the cafe's side window. Inside, Veronica was seated across from a man in a dark suit. Their voices were muffled, but her body language was unmistakable, calm, confident, and commanding. Then, fragments of her words drifted to him through the glass. He'll never see it coming, Veronica said, her tone laced with malice. Once the assets are transferred, I'll be in control. He'll have nothing. The man nodded, his response too low for Caleb to hear, but the implication was clear. Veronica wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. Caleb's chest tightened as he pieced together her intentions. She was planning to strip Adrian of everything, leaving him powerless. Panic bubbled within him. He pressed his back against the wall, his mind racing. He could pretend he hadn't heard anything. After all, who would believe a homeless boy over a woman like Veronica? But then he thought of Adrian, the way he had stepped in, the way he had looked at Caleb like he mattered. No. He couldn't stay silent. The next morning, Caleb found Lila in their usual spot near the alley. Her skeptical eyes met his as he approached. What now? She asked, crossing her arms. I need your help, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside him. Veronica's planning something. She wants to ruin Adrian, take everything from him. We have to stop her. Lila blinked, momentarily stunned. Are you serious? What are we supposed to do? Call the cops. They'll throw us out before we even finish talking. Caleb shook his head. We don't need them. We just need proof. Lila sighed, her hands dropping to her sides. You're insane. But fine. What's the plan? That evening, Caleb and Lila followed Veronica to a grand estate just outside the city, Everstone Manor. The mansion loomed against the twilight sky, its towering gates and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the chaos of their lives. From a distance, they watched as Veronica disappeared inside. Caleb's pulse quickened. We need to get closer, he whispered. Lila nodded reluctantly, her usual bravado replaced with cautious focus. The two slipped through a side gate, their movements quiet and deliberate. Caleb's heart pounded as they crept toward a window. Inside the study, Veronica was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. Papers were spread across the desk, filled with numbers and signatures Caleb couldn't decipher. This is it, Lila whispered, pulling out a battered phone. We get pictures, and we're gone. Caleb nodded, his breath shallow. They snapped photo after photo, capturing every incriminating detail. Veronica's voice filtered through the glass. By the time he realizes, it'll all be in my name. He won't have a cent left. The weight of her betrayal hit Caleb harder than he expected. He motioned for Lila to follow, and the two slipped away into the shadows, their mission complete. As they reached the safety of a distant alley, Caleb clutched the phone tightly. For the first time, he felt not just fear, but resolve. Adrian had given him hope. Now, it was his turn to give something back. The next evening, Adrian stood in the grand hall of Everstone Manor, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. Caleb and Lila hovered nearby, hidden behind a marble pillar. Caleb's heart pounded as he clutched the phone containing the damning photos they had taken the night before. Tonight, Veronica would face the truth. Adrian. Veronica's voice echoed through the hall as she descended the sweeping staircase. Her confident steps and cold gaze betrayed no hint of guilt. Why summon me in such haste? I was in the middle of something important. Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving her. We need to talk, he said evenly. Veronica smirked, gliding toward him. If this is about the company accounts again, I've told you, everything is in order. Caleb stepped out from the shadows, his small frame almost trembling with anticipation. Veronica's smirk froze. What is he doing here? She snapped, her voice sharp with disdain. Adrian's voice was calm but firm. He's here because he has something you need to see. Caleb held out the phone, his fingers steady despite the storm inside him. You've been lying to him, he said, his voice clear. We have proof. Veronica's eyes narrowed as she reached for the phone, but Adrian intercepted, taking it himself. As he swiped through the photos, his face grew darker with each image, signatures, account numbers, plans to transfer every asset into Veronica's name. How could you? Adrian's voice cracked, the betrayal cutting through him. Veronica's composure wavered, but only for a moment. She straightened, her tone icy. You'd believe the word of this street rat over me? A boy who has nothing. Adrian turned the phone toward her, his voice hard. The evidence speaks for itself, Veronica. Her mask of control shattered. You think you can just take me down? She spat, her voice rising. You're nothing without me. Do you hear me? Nothing. In a sudden, desperate move, Veronica lunged toward Adrian, her hand raised to slap the phone away. But Caleb stepped between them, his arms outstretched. Veronica shoved him hard, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Enough. Adrian's voice boomed, echoing through the hall as two officers appeared at the entrance, summoned earlier by Adrian. Veronica froze, her fury replaced by panic as the officers approached. You have no idea what you're doing, she shouted, her words trembling with desperation. One of the officers stepped forward. Veronica St. Clair, you're under arrest for attempted fraud and embezzlement. As they placed handcuffs on her, her glare burned into Caleb. This isn't over, she hissed, venom dripping from her words. Caleb watched as she was led away, his breathing unsteady. He turned to Adrian, who was now looking at him with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. You saved me, Adrian said quietly, his voice breaking. I don't even know how to thank you. You gave me hope. Caleb replied, his words simple yet powerful. I just wanted to do the same. As the sound of the police car faded into the night, Caleb stood beside Adrian, the weight of the past few days etched into his small frame. Adrian turned to him, his voice soft yet resolute. Caleb, I owe you more than words can express. Let me help you start fresh. A roof over your head, a real chance. Caleb's throat tightened as emotion swirled within him. I don't know how to thank you, he murmured. Adrian smiled gently. You already have. Together, they walked toward a brighter tomorrow, leaving behind shadows of the past. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, redemption, and hope, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful tale.